It's time again for the Insiders with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership.
Hi, I'm Chuck Chvala, former Senate Majority Leader.
And I'm Scott Jensen, former Assembly Speaker.
We're the Insiders. So, Scott, we obviously had a Supreme Court election. Elections have consequences. What kinds of things could come before the Supreme Court yet this year, the Wisconsin Supreme Court in the spring, and then usually they take a hiatus over the summer and then they're back in the fall. What do you think they might take up yet this spring or maybe even earlier in the fall of this year?
Well, I would remind people that the new justice doesn't take office until sometime later in the summer, but the court does have a big docket of cases they're going to take here in the spring, and then, as you said, they'll bring some others up in the fall. Well, I don't want to be completely crass about it, but it's the Democrats owe their national donors the agenda items that they were paying for. The Democrats nationally want to see Wisconsin's abortion laws overturned. They want to see redistricting in the congressional races so they could possibly pick up 2 more seats and flip Congress from Republican to Democrat. I expect the court will operate on both of those issues at some point this year. They will do both of those decisions are on their way. People are probably already thinking about how they just might tinker with those maps at this point. I think on 2 other issues that the court may be wise and choose to not influence the elections of 2026 on issues that maybe not be winners for them. I think they believe that the redistricting and that abortion helped them in 2026 in the elections for Supreme Court and for the fall races. But I think that there are some questions, at least I believe there's some questions with regards to whether or not overturning Act 10 helps you if you end up with higher property taxes in 2026, because essentially some of the constraints on bargaining rights in the state of Wisconsin have been lifted, and there's strikes or there's efforts to try to increase payments to public employees and thereby increase public budgets, which will cost more in property taxes or in other forms of taxes. I think they'd be smart to kick that one down the road a little bit while they're thinking about it. And then also, I think the same thing on school choice. And I don't say that as just because I'm a school choice partisan. I would point out to people that Governor Evers wisely wrote to the court and said, I don't think you should take this case up immediately at the Supreme Court. Let it work its way through the lower court levels. And I think the reason that he said that is that he did not want on his watch and just before an election, 60,000 children to be kicked out of school or be told they're going to have to leave their school in the next week. That sort of disruption, not generally something politicians are looking to have done just before they're on the ballot. So again, I expect that the Democrats will make the abortion decision. They will make congressional redistricting. I'm hopeful that they will not overturn any parts of Act 10 or of the school choice laws in Wisconsin before the 26 elections.
I think Scott has identified the issues that are the hot button issues that would come up and that people would most identify. I think that the court will probably also continue to take up, somebody might call it miscellaneous branch issues, in other between the legislative and the executive branch.
Yes.
I think that they will continue to probably vest more power in the chief executive. The Republicans from the legislative side have been very aggressive in the laws that they've passed, including the lame duck session that they did right as Tony Evers was elected, and created a situation where the legislature, even for me, and I'm a legislative supremacist, as someone once called me, I like the legislature to have a lot of power. But I do think they've gone way over the top on executive branch authority. You know, something simple like Josh Paul, when he wants to get a settlement with a wrongdoer out there, the legislature wants to prove that. Frankly, the attorney general can do a good job of that, and that's their function. They've settled these cases. So I think that talking about the specifics that Scott's brought up, I do expect that congressional redistricting brought up. How can you have a 50-50 state and have 6 Republicans and 2 Democrats with really no chance for a Democrat to win? The woman, Rebecca Cook, who ran against Van Orden's a terrible congressman. She did a marvelous job. She ran ahead of Tammy Baldwin. She ran ahead of Kamala Harris, and she still didn't have anything close to a chance of winning. That's got to change. I expect that they will deal with that, and there's legal reasons for that to be the case. It's a gerrymandered set of congressional districts. It ought to be 4 and 4 at a minimum. So there's that. I also do think that they will take up, some of the other issues. The only place where I disagree with Scott, I think Scott is right. I don't think they'll probably take up the voucher thing right away here, not before the fall election next year, although they might. But I also think that Act 10, they may take up even some pieces of it, although not the same thing. I would be a little bit surprised to see them take up the whole thing. I think the only other area, again, is this fight between the legislative and executive branch. I think the Supreme Court is probably going to give more authority to the governor. And I do think they recognize that even in the legislature, we're still functioning with a gerrymandered area for the state assembly.
In the question about the powers between the legislative and executive branch, just just you and me here, I think this is ripe for a deal between the two branches. The court, well, let me start. The Republican legislature took powers that were historically belonged to the executive branch and brought them over to themselves. And they have extended some powers they already have, like when a person's term is up and the governor, they do not approve a new person, the Senate does not approve a new person to take that office, that the old person continues to serve. I think that this is ripe for the legislative and executive branch to say, I think we'd rather settle this between ourselves than let it go to the court. And for the Republicans to allow a new governor, or even more crazy, a governor who's been here for 2 terms, who still can't appoint people to certain offices because of the reading that the Supreme Court previously gave, that no, you have to have had someone confirmed by the Senate before you can, and the other person can continue to serve. I think there's a trade between that and some of the things that the judicial branch did to the Joint Finance Committee. Those powers that the judicial branch took away from the Joint Finance Committee were there for more than 100 years. Those are legitimate, I would argue, legislative powers. And so I would hope that the two branches would sit down and be sensible and restore the appropriate functions to each branch, rather than continuing to take the moment when they have the advantage to try to steal some power from the other branch of government. Because there will be a day that there is a Republican governor, and there will be a day that there's a Democratic legislature. And they would be smart to go back and resettle those responsibilities between those two branches of government.
That's an interesting thought, and maybe in a different day and time that may have worked. Because I think the problem that we have now is that this is not simply, I can't tell you how many appointments that we took up from Governor Thompson in past. There were a couple that we held up, but by and large, people got their vote. And even when I was leader, I think I was leader when Margaret Farrell was going to be named as yes, she was, as the lieutenant governor. I voted against that. It's one of the few votes I regret, because I believe that the governor really should have the opportunity to appoint that person, and who a person that they think would do the job, because he was elected, or Governor Thompson was, and then Scott McCallum took over. But the bottom line, we're now, by the way, you could hear us both talking. We are totally on the insider game. This is very important stuff that happens. Here's the thing. It's ripe for a compromise. It would have been ripe for a compromise a while ago. But now that the Democrats have effectively total control of the Supreme Court, and will for some time, it's clear. I mean, it's at least 3 years, but it will probably be much longer than that. There's no reason for the governor to compromise with Robin Vos. Robin Vos would never give up his leverage in a situation like this. And by the way, why would the governor put in a compromise that would allow him to appoint people that the Senate won't ever approve? There have been remarkably qualified people who have been knocked out of jobs, not the least of which would be Brad Pfaff over at the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, who the Republicans actually made sure, they called it firing him just because they didn't approve. Those kinds of awful things that have been done by the Republicans, and which is a different thing than when Scott and I were around, that makes it so that the governor can't trust them as far as he can throw them, and you can't throw them very far. So the bottom line here, folks, is that this kind of change, although Scott and I, maybe in our era, it could have made sense. And with Tommy Thompson, we might have been able to make it happen, but it's sure not going to happen now because of what's happened. When you kicked Brad Pfaff, whose main problem was that he criticized the legislature for not addressing the mental health issues of farmers, when they kicked him out because he finally got some good press on that and was maybe going to make some progress for farmers, when you do that, you have no credibility on trying to cut a deal, especially not when the Democrats, let's just say it, now have control of the Supreme Court. It ain't going to happen. And in a different day and time, maybe, but not now.
A guy can hope.
See you next time.
You've been listening to The Insider with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership.